Welcome back to another video. We're out here today flying little quads and drones and stuff. And today I wanted to talk to you about the 04 Air unit because I finally got a couple and I've been doing some testing. And first and foremost, I wanted to show you the difference between the 04, I'm going to throw a CATX Polar in here as well, and the 03. So what is the difference when it comes to going between very dark environments and very bright environments? So what better place to do that than here at my favorite local office park, where the contrast is insane. Not only is it pretty extreme, and yes, there's a quad flying over my shoulder. Not only is the contrast super extreme, but it's also very harsh. Flying this right at noon, so it's basically the worst of the worst as far as lighting conditions go. And what better way to test lighting than to put it in the worst possible situation possible? So without further ado, let's get up in the air and I'm gonna show you and walk you through the test. There's voiceover, all that fun. And yeah, so let's get into it.
Since I saw the specs for the 04 Pro camera, I was really curious about how it would stack up against the 03 camera, as well as the older Vista/Polar Pro from CATX back in the day when it comes to exposure. When you go from light to dark or dark to light, your camera sensor has to basically adjust to either taking in less light because it's super bright or taking in more light because it's kind of dark. And this is really a place where cameras struggle. Even the best camera, when you change exposure dramatically, it's one of the reasons why GoPro tends to have a really strong reputation when it comes to filming in adverse locations, whether that's in the North Shore with mountain biking, skiing, anything like that, where you've got a frequent change between bright situations and very dark situations. The camera that can handle that exposure well will honestly make or break a shoot. So here we go. I want to go through and I want to test each of these VTXs and goggle pairings to see which one handles exposure changes the best. And since this is a VTX comparison, let's start with the goggle DVR. In this case, all of the cameras are set to their pretty much standard out-of-the-box configuration. The frame rate is set to 100 frames per second on all of the systems, as well as 1080p on the resolution. This is going to be the lowest latency, and also it's the only one that's consistently available across all the systems, because you can't do 4K 100 in the 04 Lite, or for that matter on the CATX Vista, but that's a whole different ballgame. Either way, first one through 03, now we're going to go through with the 04. The 04 feels like it handles the transition from light to dark very well. It seems like a big improvement from the 03, but when going from dark to light, it seems like that last little bit of exposure change is significantly slower. Again, not night or day, I am nitpicking like crazy, but it does seem like it's a little slower than the 03. Here we go. The first two quads were the Demibot. This is a Grinderino, so obviously being 3.5 inch, it's a little slower. And honestly, interestingly enough, its transitions also seem to be a little slower. Both when going from bright to dark and dark to bright, it seems to lag behind the 03 just a little bit. It's a little bit more extreme when going from dark to bright, but the transition from light to dark is comparable. And last but not least, we have on my 7-inch Apex Evo a CATX Vista with a Polar camera on it. And I mean, by far this is going to be the quickest drone because it's just fastest, and the image transitions so quick. It being a CCTV camera instead of being a traditional like filming camera sensor, it just adjusts so quick. It is very rare that it feels like I'm blind when flying this setup, where the 03 and 04, there's that kind of momentary section where you can't see anything because you're in that light bloom, whether it's going from bright to dark or dark to bright, both have it. Here we go. If you're curious about the onboard recording and how it looks, same thing. Everything's 1080p, everything's set to auto. The frame rate here is going to be 100. I forgot to mention it with the goggles section. The frame rate is halved on the goggles recording, so everything for the 04 and 03 systems are going to be at 50 frames per second, where the Vista is actually going to be shockingly 60 frames per second, because that is what it transmits to the goggles. And now that I've done some little flippy floppies, here we go through with the 04. Honestly, the 04's image overall is far better than the O3. It's not like night and day different, but it is visibly better, and its transition from light into a dark environment is quicker. I think its transition from dark to light is about the same, possibly a little slower than O3, but it definitely is I would say the leader when it comes to DJI cameras on the newest digital systems. And here we go with the Granderino. Obviously Rocksteady is on. I completely forgot to turn it off, so it is very punched in. The field of view is so much different with Rocksteady on. Honestly, it's a little frustrating how punched in it is, but honestly, it doesn't look all that much different than the goggles DVR when it comes to the image quality itself and how it handles lighting changes. So you can see what a GoPro looks like through the same run. Here is my GoPro Hero 11 Black Mini. It's got an ND16, Hyper Smooth is off. It's in a standard TPU mount. And as you can see, even when you're inside the dark environment, you can still see details outside. And by the time you hit the lighted environment, you can already see pretty much all the detail. The ground is a little darker than I would expect, and that's mostly because I'm running an ND16, but overall the GoPro's image quality is very, very good, and it handles that light transition excellently, similar to the Polar Pro. To be thorough as possible with this comparison, here is going to be a side-by-side with the O3 Air unit and the goggles to DVR for O3. Obviously the frame rate is going to be different, but both clips are in 1080p. Both these are from the same flight, they're synced up together. And you can see that the goggles DVR does look a little different. Honestly, I think it's a little brighter. Obviously, the field of view is a little wider, and I do think the colors are a little flatter. But especially when it comes to the light portion of it, I don't think there's a huge difference. The field of view, on the other hand, I do think is a pretty decent difference. But that just may be down to not wanting extra distortion. Because I also do see that there is a little image correction in the onboard DVR on both O3 and O4, the Lite and the Pro. Here we go through with the O4 Pro, and as you can see, the goggles and the onboard recording image are very, very similar. The only thing that's slightly different is that the DVR on the goggles is slightly, again, wider field of view. And here we go with the O4 Lite. Same thing as the O4 Pro and the O3. The image that you're getting in the goggles is very, very similar to the image that you're seeing on the internal recording. But I will once again say, Rocksteady is so aggressive when it comes to this. I really don't like the way it looks. And also it punches in so much that you almost can't tell what you're framing up in your goggle DVR. So if you're recording stuff that you want to use that footage, I would highly recommend record without Rocksteady on. And then if you need to apply smoothing or stabilization, do it in post with something like GyroFlow. It just gives you flexibility, because obviously if you record with Rocksteady on, you can't take it off in post, which is super frustrating. And it may just be me kicking myself on this one, but I would highly recommend turn Rocksteady off. It punches in way too far, in my opinion, when it comes to the DJI O4 Lite. I also feel the same way about the O3, but I don't have sample footage, obviously, for that. Let's really hone in on these transitions. So here's going to basically be uncut footage from the goggles, going through with the O3 Air unit, then the O4 Air unit, trying to start it right about the same point, and then trying to stop it right as I get all of the detail into the image. You can obviously pause at any point, poke through, and really get an idea of what this looks like. Here we go with the O4 Lite, and then finally with the Polar Pro. Once again, the Polar Pro just looks crazy in compared to the other two systems. Next, I'm going to put them side by side, so that way you can get a better idea of them kind of in the same window. You can pause at any point, take a look at where the transition happens, how long it takes, and then now we're going to move to some still frames. Each of these on this first still frame set are captured as soon as I feel like I have all the detail entering the garage. The Vista obviously is by far first, with nearly 10 bricks on that right side visible. That's the way I've kind of timed going through here. Next is the O4 Pro with 6, the O3 with 5 visible bricks, almost 5.5. The 04 light at the end with between 4 and 5 bricks visible is just slightly behind, but it's very, very comparable going from light to dark to the 03. Here's where things get a little different. Obviously the Vista wins, no problem at all. The 03 I think actually surprisingly takes second place. You can see on the right side of the image the sidewalk area exiting the garage, which you can't see on the 04 Pro and 04 Lite. The 04 Lite really struggled on this test. It by far took the longest to gain all of the detail back, with even here the exposure on the roadway still losing detail. It was surprisingly poor on the exit of the garage, especially when it was so good entering from light to dark. Just an interesting observation. I don't know if that's going to be consistent throughout all of the 04s. And if you're curious, here we go with the same footage from the internal recording on each of the systems. Once again, you can pause at any point, take a look at the image and dissect it, but it's really more there for anybody who's curious and just wants to poke through it. Now, let's go through and do the once again same thing with the onboard footage, putting it side by side by side. Gives you a decent comparison. I tried to sync it up as best I could, but obviously slightly different speeds, but at least it gives you a good idea. Now, obviously the two most important systems we're talking about today, the 03 and 04 Pro, have a side by side there. Pause it if you want, take a look at any of the frames and get a good idea of what's going on. Honestly, both look very, very good and very, very similar. I think the 04 has the advantage entering the garage from light to dark. And then when you're exiting the garage from a dark environment to a light environment, I think the 03 has just the slightest edge. I will say that the light bloom on the 03 feels more intense to me, but again, that just may be more of a difference in sensor size than actual changing what I can see in the goggles, because I don't feel like that's all that much different. In a second, I'm going to compare the performance of the light when it comes to changing the resolution on the air unit. But before I do that, I just wanted to kind of once again reiterate, between the 04 light with Rocksteady on and the 04 light with Rocksteady off, i.e. the goggles view, this should make it so clear how much different the performance is as far as the field of view. It's almost like you can't frame up the shot correctly with how much it crops in. I really, really, really would recommend, if you're going to use this footage and you want to be able to edit it, or just, again, while you're flying, be able to frame up your shot better, fly with Rocksteady off, and then use GyroFlow if you have to stabilize it. You'll have more flexibility, and you'll have just more control in general. My absolute recommendation is do not use Rocksteady, in particular on that light, because it punches in a lot, like a shocking amount. Just to do proper due diligence, I wanted to double check to make sure that having the camera set to a different resolution wasn't going to make any difference between the responsiveness of the camera to different lighting situations. So basically I set on my 03 it to record at 4K, 100 frames per second, and also 1080p at 100 frames per second, and then flew through the tunnel in both directions just to see if there was any difference at all. So here, this is the 4K image. You can see obviously it's crispy, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. Still has the same light bloom that 03 has, both entering and exiting the tunnel. Here we go through with 1080p, and honestly, I don't think there's a difference. Interestingly, I do think, because this is a separate quad from the previous test, that this 03 air unit is actually worse when it comes to the dynamic range, because the light bloom is insane. Both lenses are clean, both are relatively fresh and new, no scrapes, no scratches. For some reason, that camera just seems to not handle dynamic range as well as the other. Couldn't tell you why. I don't know if just sensors have natural variance, which is what's going on there, or maybe even the lens isn't quite perfect. Either way, it's something that I did notice. Now let's dive in and double check with the goggles. And here we go. This is recorded with the goggles. This is the goggle DVR. It does record in half the frame rate, and obviously it records in 1920 by 1080 because that's what the 03 and 04 air units transmit. Here we go through. Again, looks very, very similar to what we saw before with the other quad in 1080, and very similar to what we saw the internal recording on the air unit look like. I don't think there's any real difference in what's transmitted, but either way, here is the image from the resolution being set to 1920 by 1080 on the air unit. Obviously, this does give you better latency, so there is a benefit to the pilot, but I don't see a huge difference in how it performs changing between different lighting situations. Honestly, I think if that's the key, or that's what you're trying to get or to improve, this is not the way to do it, because it seems like the resolution just makes the image prettier on the internal recording. Here I have the goggle DVR on the right and the onboard recording on the left. With the O3, this is set to 4K at 100 frames per second. And as you can see, the goggle view, which is 1080p and recorded at 50 frames per second, looks pretty much the same as that 4K internal recording. So it doesn't seem like there's any real effect when it comes to the DVR, and actually the framing of the shot actually looks similar too. And here we go with the 1080. The internal recording is on the left. The goggles DVR is on the right. And again, they look basically the same. The one thing I will note is that the goggles view, interestingly, on the 1080p run has a bigger field of view. I don't know if anybody else has ever noticed this, but if you set your O3 air unit to 1080p 100 frames per second, not only do you get lower latency, but it seems like you also get more field of view. Again, not 100% sure, not sure if this is just this camera, but with the 4K recording, which you'll see in a second, the field of view is actually the same as the internal recording on both 1080p and 4K. Just a weird quirk. So as you can see here, this is the goggle DVR. Left is 1080, right is 4K, and you can see the 4K one is punched in a little bit. The field of view on the 1080p on the left is slightly more open, but as far as their handling of light goes, they're basically the same. And then here we're going to go to the internal recording, and interestingly enough, you'll see that like the goggle DVR on 4K, on the 4K run, these are both punched in just a little bit too. Honestly, not a huge difference in their light performance. Both have the same bloom, both adjust the same. They seem basically identical, with the exception to slightly narrower field of view, similar to the 4K goggle DVR. No idea why this is the case. It's just weird and confusing. I think it's just one of those DJI things. It was really interesting to see this pop up in my testing, something I didn't expect to find, but it is interesting to know. If you're out there flying DJI, especially on the O3, not only will you net yourself better latency flying in 1080p and 100 frames per second on Goggles 2 or Goggles Integra, but you'll also net yourself more field of view by flying in 1080p. No idea why, but also it should be noted that that wider field of view is only on the internal, it should be noted that that wider field of view is only on the goggle DVR. On the internal recording, it is punched in just like it is on the 4K shot, as well as the 4K goggle DVR. Again, just a weird quirk.
And there we go, as this struggles with exposure. As you can see, I really think the O4 is an improvement over the O3. It is not a massive improvement. It is more, I would say, incremental than I thought it might be. But overall, it is an improvement, especially when it comes to the O4 Pro versus the O3. For me personally, the O4 Lite is, I don't want to say a step down, but it is really not on par with the O3. It really is a step below as far as the overall image goes, as well as its ability to perform transitioning from light areas to dark areas. So take that with what you will. Obviously, the CADX Vista with the Polar on it is freakishly good. It really is a step above everything else, but that's because it uses a CCTV camera sensor, where the newer DJI systems use a traditional camera sensor, which just is not as sensitive to light and is not as rapid when it comes to switching between dark and bright environments. And since it's a CCTV camera, they can also run a sensor that's much more sensitive to light, which is why I run the Polar in that drone as well. It can basically see at night, where the O3 and the O4 Air unit are okay. They can handle somewhat lit environments to fly an FPV, but they are not a low light camera by any stretch of the imagination. Hopefully you found this interesting and possibly even learned something. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of each camera? What do you think of the performance? And then also let me know what your experience has been as well. If you've flown the 04 Air unit, if you've flown the 03 Air unit, does this line up with your experience, or have you had better or worse? Especially with the 03, it seems like between the two 03 Air units I used in the test, there may be a not insignificant difference in the sensor. So I'm just curious if you've had the same experience or slightly different. And that pretty much wraps it up. So as always, like the video, subscribe, all that fun stuff helps me out in the YouTube algorithm, helps me make more of these videos. And as always, there's links down below, the stuff I use to make these videos and stuff I would personally recommend to you. They are affiliate links, that whole song and dance, it helps the channel out. Yeah, so again, thank you so much for joining me. Catch you in the next one, bye.